Hey everyone, as you can see, Edward Snowden is another man whose life was ruined by the United States. There's a lot of people whose lives were ruined and destroyed because of the United States. But it's in particular, obviously, we're talking about the main, most important conservative politician, Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated. Really sad, tragic. It's devastating what happened to Charlie Kirk. He was assassinated, and not only was Charlie Kirk assassinated, but he was assassinated over his freedom of speech. Edward Snowden, people could also claim that, well, no, like Edward Snowden also was persecuted for his freedom of speech. I mean, he had to leave the United States. He had to move all the way to Russia. He had to defect to Russia. So clearly, Edward Snowden, his freedom of speech also, he would like clearly what I'm saying is clearly Edward Snowden was also persecuted for his freedom of speech. Obviously, in a different way. Uh, you know, clearly, clearly, Charlie Kirk, what happened to Charlie Kirk was just so tragic, such a tragedy, such a tragedy, tra- such a tragedy, such a tragedy. What happened to Charlie Kirk was a total tragedy, and it's just awful, devastating, so sad. What happened to Charlie Kirk and Edward Snowden? He also was in a way persecuted uh, over his free speech because Charlie Kirk was assassinated over his free speech, and then Edward Snowden. Obviously, it's not the same. Obviously, Edward Snowden, thank God, still has his life, right? So clearly, oh, in terms of freedom of speech, Charlie Kirk definitely suffered the worst consequences for of a like a dictatorship kind of uh how do I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the right words to say this. Charlie Kirk basically lost his life over freedom of speech. And obviously, Edward Snowden, thank God he's still alive, but he did have to leave the United States and go to Russia. He also was persecuted in a way for his freedom of speech. So I do think Edward Snowden, I mean, in my opinion, in this case, Edward Snowden clearly has nothing to do in terms of like he wasn't in on it. What I'm saying is Edward Snowden is not a Fed anymore. He's not, well, he doesn't work with the American Feds. He's not in America. So he wouldn't be biased, right? When Candace Owens is trying to find the truth, and Candace Owens doesn't even trust what the feds are saying, right? When Candace Owens believes that the American feds were somehow involved in the assassination of Charlie Kirk, now Candace Owens has the opportunity to do a video call. She can request to do a video call with Edward Snowden. And I do feel like Edward Snowden, in my opinion, would be very helpful to Candace Owens because why not? Why not? Why wouldn't Edward Snowden help Candace Owens out, right? Especially with Edward Snowden and his knowledge about the feds. He probably, I mean, he worked for the NSA. If Edward Snowden worked for the NSA, he's got to have deep inside knowledge about the deep state and the feds, right? Especially the deep state, which the deep state has people everywhere. So Candace Owens and should really consider, in my opinion, it would be great for the investigation into the assassination over Charlie Kirk. And in terms of the investigation, I definitely do think Candace Owens should arrange an interview with Edward Snowden, who, I mean, if you don't remember the story, just to sum up, uh, I'm not an expert on the Edward Snowden case, but just to sum up what more or less what happened, Edward Snowden, and like keep in mind, I might be missing some things. Like I said, I'm not an expert on the Edward Snowden case, but Edward Snowden worked for the NSA. He exposed the United States government for like spying on people, and of course, the United States government has their version of the story, which I don't believe at all. I believe Edward Snowden's version of the story. And Edward Snowden had to basically leave the United States for his safety and go all the way to Russia, which a few weeks ago, well, not a few weeks ago, about it was recently. I don't know if it was about 3 weeks ago. Maybe it was about 2 weeks ago or last week. But anyways, within the last 2 weeks, I also suggested and said that in my opinion, maybe even Candace Owens should consider just temporarily until they could figure out who's behind the Charlie Kirk assassination. Maybe even Candace Owens should consider moving temporarily to Russia for safety and asking Vladimir Putin for safety and refuge, political asylum in Russia. So, Candace Owens, she even said that she was so paranoid that the feds might be out to get her. Candace Owens was so paranoid that the feds might be out to get her, and rightfully so. She was rightfully so paranoid. Like, it's paranoid is not a right word. Paranoid is what they use when they want to like insinuate someone's crazy, right? Candace Owens is not crazy. Candace Owens' fears of the feds are legitimate. Candace Owens has legitimate fears of the American feds. Trust me, believe me. Believe me, Candace Owens is rightfully has legitimate fears of the American feds. So, and Candace Owens was saying the reason she didn't want to go to the Charlie Kirk memorial was because she was scared. She's scared of the American feds. And especially when she is doing a whole expose on the American feds, she especially doesn't want to go in such a public place, after Charlie Kirk had just been assassinated, especially Candace Owens, who could be another target, didn't want to go to the Charlie Kirk memorial, which is extremely sad, obviously, for many reasons, for the fact that there's a Charlie Kirk memorial, that the fact that he was assassinated is one of, like, obviously the memorial it was great that they had a memorial for him. It was great that they honored him. It was great that America did a big celebration in a sense and honored Charlie Kirk. Like, okay, celebration in the sense that they honored his life, right? I'm not talking about the people who celebrated the others, I'm not talking about, let's be clear. Let's be very clear. Let's be very, very clear. I'm not talking about the people who celebrated his assassination. No, I'm talking about the people who had like an end of life celebration, who had celebrated his life. And like, how certain religions and certain cultures, when they have funerals, they're more happy. They're happy. They're not happy he's dead. They're happy. Okay. How do I, Black people funerals. Oh my God. Okay. You know what I'm saying? So basically, anyways, celebration of life, right? A lot of funerals, they'll have a celebration of life ceremony. It's not that they're happy he's dead. They're just celebrating the person's life. They're just have a different perspective on death. This is just different cultures. This is different cultures, okay? This is different cultures. Oh, okay. So basically, Candace Owens was so afraid of the feds that she didn't even want to go to the Charlie Kirk memorial, and she had to miss it because she's afraid of the feds, Candace Owens. So another person who's afraid of the feds and can relate to her is Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden is definitely afraid of the American feds. Edward Snowden is so afraid of the American feds, he left the United States and went all the way to Russia. And I think he went to other countries too in the interim. And before Russia, I think before Russia, he may have actually gone to other countries. But anyways, like I said, I'm not an expert on the Edward Snowden case. But I do think that Candace Owens should really consider reaching out to Edward Snowden. He's done them before. Edward Snowden has done online video calls. No, obviously, Edward Snowden is not going to leave Russia and go to the United States. Obviously, he won't do that. But what he probably would agree to do is an online video call from Russia where he's obviously will be safe in Russia to do an online video call. And it's not like the Russians are going to use the opportunity to, like, once they're on the VPN or whatever, once the Russians have Edward Snowden online with Candace Owens, it's not like the Russians are going to suddenly use the opportunity to hack the Americans or anything, right? The Russians, obviously, after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, the Russians expressed extreme sympathy and disbelief and anger towards the fact that Charlie Kirk had been assassinated. So um, the Russians, Edward Snowden, I definitely see them more than willing to cooperate with this video call with Candace Owens, and they will allow Candace Owens to do a special video call with Edward Snowden. I don't think even Edward Snowden has to get permission from the FSB or from the Russian government to do a video call. I'm pretty sure Edward Snowden is a free man in Russia. I'm pretty sure, and he probably could just agree to do it. Like if he wants to do it, he might not even agree to do it. But I do think that, in my opinion, in this case, Edward Snowden is an ally to Candace Owens, and I do think it would be really wise for Candace Owens to uh, pick Edward Snowden's brain in a sense, right? To talk to him because clearly Edward Snowden, he's also afraid of the American feds. Candace Owens is afraid of the American feds, and Edward Snowden's afraid of the American feds. Edward Snowden used to work for the NSA, the National Security Agency. Edward Snowden clearly knows a lot about the American feds. Edward Snowden knows a lot about the deep state. So if Candace Owens is currently investigating the deep state and so if Candace Owens is currently investigating the deep state and the American feds, well, a great person to talk to and consult with would definitely be Edward Snowden. He knows very well the feds. He knows the American feds very well. He knows the deep state probably very well, Edward Snowden. And the deep state, they have people everywhere. They have agents everywhere, being sneaky and doing little sneaky maneuvers and stuff like that. So yes, Candace Owens, like people got to get on this because time is sensitive, especially in an investigation. Like there, you have a small window of opportunity until the trail runs cold, right? So I think Candace Owens and the Candace Owens supporters, and of course I also support Candace Owens. Candace Owens should get on top of this and should immediately, as soon as possible, request a video call interview with Edward Snowden, and he can provide insight into the American feds, into NSA, into the deep state. And I think that Edward Snowden could probably definitely provide a lot of insight, his opinion, into the Charlie Kirk assassination, especially when if Edward Snowden could be given the documents that Candace Owens has. I mean, if Candace Owens is trusting of Edward Snowden, obviously, I'm not saying she should trust him completely, but I'm just saying if Candace Owens, I mean, I trust Edward Snowden more than the feds. I mean, and I think Candace Owens she probably trusts Edward Snowden more than the American feds too, right? So why not, right? So I think Candace Owens would also be wise to share her intelligence information on the Charlie Kirk assassination with Edward Snowden. And Edward Snowden, after reviewing Candace Owens's, after Edward Snowden reviews Candace Owens's intelligence information, Edward Snowden can also give his own report on what he thinks going on in America right now. And sometimes you have to look at the bigger picture, right? There is a bigger picture here. It's part of a deep state agenda. It's not like one isolated incident, right? Especially if Candace Owens is right, and I believe she's right. I do believe the American feds are in on it. Candace Owens believes that the Tyler Robinson, Candace Owens all week for the last 2 weeks has been poking holes into the story, saying the things don't add up. The American feds clearly are not telling people the truth. The American feds look guilty. Candace Owens is so afraid of the American feds, she wouldn't even go to the Charlie Kirk Memorial because Candace Owens was so afraid of the American feds since there was just a major assassination with Charlie Kirk, and Candace Owens could be next, right? So Candace Owens, rightfully so, was afraid. Was justified in her fears against the American feds. So, in my opinion, I think Edward Snowden in this case is a great ally, would be a great ally to Candace Owens, especially with Edward Snowden and his knowledge about the deep state, even the deep state agenda, and the NSA and how the American feds operate. And like I said, there's probably a bigger picture here, right? You should look at the bigger picture. Follow the money. Follow the money, follow the money, follow the money. Look at the bigger picture. especially if it is determined that the deep state and the American feds are behind the Charlie Kirk assassination. You have to then realize that the deep state agenda, the American feds, they don't really usually just do isolated incidents. It's usually part of a bigger picture, part of a bigger plan, right? It's usually part of a picture. It's usually part of a bigger picture, part of a bigger plan. The deep state agenda is not just one isolated incident, right? The deep state agenda, the American feds, their agenda is a big. There's a bigger picture here, right? That Candace Owens needs to figure out. So I think would be a great opportunity and resource for Candace Owens if she could do an online video call with Edward Snowden and get his perspective, his point of view, his opinion on the Charlie Kirk assassination, and what he thinks about the American feds. I think we kind of know that Edward Snowden probably doesn't like the American feds, and Edward Snowden definitely doesn't like the deep state because, Edward Snowden felt so scared of the American feds and the deep state that Edward Snowden had to pick up and leave America altogether and go to Russia for safety and request political asylum in Russia. Which I might have to do too. You never know. You never know. I might have to request no, Russia wouldn't grant me political asylum, but I know three other countries that would grant me personally political asylum. Not Russia. Russia wouldn't. Anyways, and these days, because of YouTube, everyone, just for asking questions, just for challenging the main narrative of the story. You saw the Tucker Carlson series where he's challenging the main narrative of 9/11. That's pretty intense. You saw the Tucker Carlson, he's challenging Israel and he's challenging, Benjamin Netanyahu and what his response to Charlie Kirk assassination. So clearly, because of YouTube, thank God for YouTube and freedom of speech. Thank God for YouTube and freedom of speech. Now, there's so many controversial figures who are emerging, right? Because they're asking questions, they're challenging the main narrative, especially about 9/11, which, Canada, like, yeah, we pretty much knew. Anyways, Canada knew a lot about 9/11, especially even before it happened. So Canada, let's just say that, yeah, there's definitely more to the story. There needs to be more investigation into everything. Another thing, obviously, is COVID. They definitely need to do an investigation into COVID, and yeah, and actually, yeah, when Candace Owens, if she is would be able to get Edward Snowden on a video call with her, I hope that Candace Owens would also ask Edward Snowden about COVID and two other major events, which I'm not going to say. But anyways, Candace Owens can figure it out. I think Candace Owens, if she is able to get Edward Snowden on a video call from Russia, right? Candace Owens should also ask Edward Snowden about COVID and two other major events. Maybe not as major as COVID, but you know what I mean. So let's go to the comments. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot. So yes, Olivia Bloom came in. Olivia Bloom came in and she said, something is definitely off about the way they're trying to forgive and forget. The push to move on is crazy. I agree. I agree. There were so many unanswered questions. And they did the same thing with 9/11. The 9/11 story was so, I was, okay, I was younger. Obviously, I was a teenager when 9/11 happened. So, but from as far as I remember, when 9/11 happened, I was a teenager in Canada, right? Um, they were so quick to just pin it on somebody, you know, and it didn't make sense to story. There were a lot of holes in the 9/11 story. So, and now if you do watch the Tucker Carlson, 20 years ago, especially from Canada, if you're a Canadian and you tried to ask questions about 9/11, they would say, "Oh, how dare you? You can't question 9/11. You can't ask questions about 9/11. How dare you, right? 20 years ago. But now, Tucker Carlson, even Tucker Carlson, a major American news person, Tucker Carlson, I'm a fan of Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is doing a whole special series on 9/11, discussing 9/11 and challenging the main narrative of 9/11 and asking, he's not saying it was an inside job, but he's just asking, why does it look like it might have been an inside job, right? He's not saying it was an inside job, at least not yet. I haven't seen the full series yet. I haven't watched every episode of the Tucker Carlson 9/11 series, so who knows? Maybe at the end of the series, Tucker Carlson himself will even conclude he thinks it was an inside job. But that's what I'm just saying. At least now we can finally ask questions about it without being called crazy, without being called conspiracy theorists, without losing our jobs over asking questions about it. Finally, people can ask legitimate questions about 9/11, things that didn't make sense now or then. And people can ask questions about the Charlie Kirk assassination. People can ask questions about COVID. People can ask questions about Edward Snowden and what happened with him. People can ask questions about World War II now and World War II Germany and Germany's side of the story. Because Germany, I always figured there was more side to the story, because in World War II Germany, they basically just said, oh, they're Nazis and they were evil. They just kept saying they're Nazis and they were evil. They're not evil Nazis, Nazis evil. But then I met Germans and I talked to Germans and I asked Germans from today, hey, did your German grandfather tell you any stories about World War II, etc.? And the Germans from Germany had a very different, and they were, obviously my German friends are nice, right? My German buddy from the German military, he's a nice guy. And, he told me, yeah, Germany does have a bit of a different story. So, sorry, I had to go for a second. Someone was calling me, like on the phone, but I didn't answer the phone call because then, um, it was my handler. It was my German handler calling me. No, I'm just joking. So, anyways, basically now, thank God to YouTube and to social media, we can actually ask legitimate questions about major American events: World War II, uh, 9/11, COVID, the Boston Marathon, what happened in California, the California fires, what happened in Waco, Texas, mad cow disease, everything, Flint, Michigan, the Flint, Michigan scandal, and the Epstein case, of course, the Epstein case, which everyone agrees has been totally mishandled, the Epstein case. So finally, thank God to social media and YouTube, people can actually start asking legitimate questions about all these major events. Without being called crazy, without being called a conspiracy theorist, without being called any other offensive names, right? So let's go back to comments. Oh, hello. We have a Russian who came in, Sergey Lavrov, and he said hi, and then Sergey Lavrov came in and he said he's ducked out in Russia with us, Edward Snowden, to speak a little Russian. Yeah, I speak a little bit of Russian too. So, привет, Sergey. Как дела сегодня утром? Вот, для меня это утро канадские утра. Я из Канады. И сейчас, сейчас 9 утром. 9 утром сейчас. Привет, добро пожаловать на мой канал. И я хочу задать вам вопрос, если ты не против. По вашему мнению, ты думаешь, что Эдвард Сноуден, он счастлив, он доволен в России, он доволен, он счастлив? По вашему мнению, что ты думаешь, Эдвард Сноуден, как он чувствует? Как он чувствует? Он быть счастливый, он быть доволен в России. So anyways, I just asked Sergey Lavrov, hello, welcome to the channel. Thank you, welcome to the channel. And I also said, in your opinion, do you think Edward Snowden is happy in Russia? Do you think he's sad, like he's happy with his life in Russia? Do you think Edward Snowden uh, might want to even, so no, I didn't actually say that in Russian, but I did say, I asked him, do you think Edward Snowden is happy in Russia? Basically, that's what I said in Russian. And who knows? Maybe we'll see Edward Snowden in the future, depending on if the administration changes, right? So if things change in America, right? If suddenly America is rebuilt from scratch, suddenly if America is uh, totally changed, like revamped, reinvented. Suddenly, if America is completely what's the word? What's the right word? Not reinvented. Well, yeah, reinvented. Okay, let's say if America totally is, I don't want to say taken over. I don't want to say overthrown. But you have to admit that the American government and the CIA, they're very prone to overthrowing other people's governments. I mean, you have to admit that the American government and the CIA, they're always doing regime changes, right? The United States government, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, they're famous for doing regime changes in other countries. I mean, they did a regime change in the Middle East. They tried to do, I mean, technically the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union collapsed, wasn't that kind of like a regime change, right? Was the end of the Cold War? Was that the Americans doing? Was it the Americans doing the end of the Cold War and the Soviet Union collapse? So let's just say that the American government, they're used to regime changes. So let's just say that in the future and in America, there's a big regime change in America, not in other countries for a change, like not a regime change in Japan, not a regime change in Germany, not a regime change in Russia, not a regime change in the Middle East. But let's say that America has a regime change, a major regime change. So let's say America has a major regime change, then maybe Edward Snowden would actually feel comfortable moving back to the United States, right? And he wouldn't have to live in really cold Russia anymore. Anyways, Canada, I like cold weather though. Canada's cold too. Canada's cold, Russia's cold. I actually like cold weather, so it's not a big deal. So let's go back to comments. So, Le Chanel de Mysterio Manteau et. So, anyways, I don't speak French, but I don't know how to properly pronounce your name. So, anyways, I'll just call you Le Chanel. Le Chanel came in and said, yes, Snowden is a hero for all he exposed, and I would love to hear what he has to say. Yes, I agree. Edward Snowden, like, I would love to hear his opinion on the Charlie Kirk assassination. I would love to hear Edward Snowden's perspective on COVID. I would love to hear Edward Snowden's perspective on what happened to Trump. Because remember, yeah, there were two assassination attempts on Donald Trump, right? So I would like to hear Edward Snowden's opinion on the assassination attempts on Donald Trump. I would like to hear Edward Snowden's opinion about everything, including the Russia-Ukraine war. I would like to hear Edward Snowden's. I would like to hear how he's doing because, in Canada, we are taught to be nice, caring people. In Canada, Canadians are taught to be nice. Like, that's why most of the world loves Canada. Canada has a lot of allies. Canada, it maintains good, peaceful relationships with a lot of countries. So, part of being a good person, if you want to practice what you preach, is not just using people for when it's convenient for you, right? And right now, I hope that Edward Snowden doesn't view this as, oh, they're just using him now when it's convenient for America, right? But knowing Candace Owens and what she's been through, I think Edward Snowden will be sympathetic to Candace Owens and what she's going through. But at the same time, I really hope like that Edward Snowden, it doesn't feel like, oh, well, you're just calling me now because you need my help, right? But 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, where were the people saying, "Hey, Edward Snowden, how you been doing, Edward Snowden? How you doing, Edward Snowden?" Like Canadians, we're raised to be polite and to actually care about other people. And in the United States, there's more of a business transaction kind of thing, right? In the United States, they only care when it's suddenly opportunistic. The United States, usually Americans typically have an attitude like, "Oh, we're only." Oh, that was weird. Someone. Anyways, in the United States, they have like this attitude like, "Oh, well, we're only going to care when it benefits the United States," right? The United States is like that friend that is like uses you as a user. The United States is like that friend like, "Oh, we're only going to come around when you're on top and when you're doing well." And the United States is only going to come around as part of to get but when you're a person who is like at rock bottom, suddenly the United States, like that friend will suddenly, when you're at hit rock bottom, the United States is like that friend that just disappears and like pretends like they don't even know you, right? So but Canadians, we're raised to be polite and to care about people, right? So I if Candace Owens does try to reach out to Edward Snowden, in my opinion, she really should be really careful because this guy is gonna be helping her out, right? And he doesn't have to do it. And I mean, she's only really calling him because she needs his help. But like, I mean, no one called him 2 years ago. No one called him. Well, you know what I mean. Like, obviously people called him, but what I'm saying is like, from America, no one really is like calling from America saying, "Hey, Edward Snowden, how are you doing?" Right? They're just calling now because they need his help, and suddenly it's advantageous. It's opportunistic. It's in America's best interest. It serves America for Candace Owens to call Edward Snowden, right? So obviously, though, Candace Owens, she's not part of America. Like, okay, no, Candace Owens is a part of America, but she's not part of the deep state. Candace Owens is not part of the deep state agenda. She's a victim of the deep state, just as much as Edward Snowden was a victim of the deep state, just as much as Edward Snowden was a victim of the feds, the American feds. Candace Owens is also a victim of the American feds, and also, of course, Charlie Kirk, if he really was assassinated by the American feds, like Candace Owens is starting to make people open the possibility that could be the case. Candace Owens clearly said herself she doesn't trust the feds. She doesn't believe their story. The American feds are clearly lying to us. So Candace Owens is the first one actually to admit that the American feds might actually be behind the Charlie Kirk assassination. So I think that hopefully Candace Owens and Edward Snowden can come to agreement that they're both kind of victims of the American feds, and they will kind of bond over that and then agree to work together. But like I said, just randomly calling Edward Snowden when suddenly America needs help is like not always the best look for America, right? But Canada, we're raised more to be polite, and we maintain relationships with even our enemies. I mean, even Canada, there's countries like, for example, India. India has had a very rocky, turbulent relationship with Canada, but Canada still tries to maintain diplomatic relationships with India and a lot of the Indian diplomats. Anyways, that's just an example. So let's go back to comments. Just Candace Owens, if she does reach out to Edward Snowden, which I hope she does, she just like, "Hey, Edward Snowden, how's life been in Russia?" maybe start off being like, "How's it going over there?" You know, instead of being like, "I need information." You know what I mean? Like that's the polite thing to do. The polite thing when you call someone that and you know you need something, even if they know you need something from them, still at least be like, "Hey, how's it going? How you been doing in Russia? What's going on over there?" You know, maybe some polite chit chat, cup of coffee first, maybe cup of coffee. Maybe like get a cup of coffee first before you just go right into asking them like what you need from them, right? So I just common courtesy, being polite. That's all. That's my Canadian coming in and talking. So, anyways, I'm not the best at explaining things. So if that still sounded confusing after I explained it, sorry. I hope you understood what I meant. I think people understood what I meant there. So Harry came in and said, how would he know anything? He used to work for the NSA, the National Security Agency. He has dealt with the feds. He knows how the feds operate, right? Edward Snowden, having worked for the National Security Agency, he clearly has a good idea of the feds, the American feds. He knows how they operate. He knows about the deep state. Edward Snowden, I'm sure Edward Snowden, having worked for the NSA, knows about the deep state. So, and Edward Snowden, is like this is I guess a follow up question. Is Edward Snowden currently like an intelligence officer in Russia? Does the Russian FSB, do they share information with Edward Snowden? Are they like on a intelligence sharing basis, right? So Edward Snowden all around is just a very intelligent person, and he's another set of eyes, right? He's a fresh set of eyes. So when you're doing an investigation, Candace Owens, obviously, she's a great investigator, but Edward Snowden, especially his background coming from the NSA, the National Security Agency, Edward Snowden is a fresh set of eyes who could look at the evidence and examine the case and give his opinion on the Charlie Kirk assassination. So, you know, Edward Snowden doesn't have to like be involved in it to like be able to give his opinion on the Charlie Kirk assassination. Edward Snowden is a consultant, right? Like, there's probably people who would pay thousands of dollars, even more, millions maybe, to consult with Edward Snowden, right? Like, I don't know about millions, but anyways, like I said, I'm not an expert on Edward Snowden and his whole business, right? But there's probably people who would pay to get a consultation from Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden, being a former work for the NSA, the National Security Agency. Edward Snowden, has expertise. He's a computer person, right? Edward Snowden is an IT professional. He's a computer professional. He's a American government professional. You know, well, he used to be. You know what I mean? He used to work for the NSA. So, I mean, especially like someone who used to work for the NSA could definitely, especially when they're not biased anymore, because clearly Edward Snowden is not in on it. He's not part of the feds. In fact, if Edward Snowden was in on it, I mean, if Edward Snowden still worked for the feds, if Edward Snowden was a Fed, if Edward Snowden was an American Fed, I wouldn't trust anything he said. So the fact that Edward Snowden is all the way in Russia and probably had nothing to do with the Charlie Kirk assassination, it means it's great that Edward Snowden can give his professional opinion after reviewing the evidence, after reviewing the Charlie Kirk assassination evidence and details. Then because Edward Snowden is no longer part of the American system and he's clearly probably definitely not in on it, so Candace Owens can trust what Edward Snowden has to say, right? Candace Owens can not fully. He's still obviously defected to Russia, so she can't. Obviously, I wouldn't advise that she fully trust everything he says, but she could definitely trust a lot of what he has to say because he's not part of the American feds, right? He's not. He left the American feds. He escaped the American feds. Edward Snowden, right? He escaped America and went to Russia to escape the American feds. So clearly, he's not in on it with the American feds. So if the American feds are behind the Charlie Kirk assassination, Edward Snowden more likely was not part of that at all. He was not in on it. And Edward Snowden would be a great fresh set of eyes to give his opinion on the Charlie Kirk assassination. And that would be a great resource consultant for Candace Owens, who's currently desperately trying to find the truth who really was behind the Charlie Kirk assassination. So once again, I probably didn't explain that too well. I tried to explain that very well, but anyways, I'm not the best at explaining things. I apologize, but I hope people understood what I was getting at there, what I meant. I hope people understood. Basically, obviously, Edward Snowden, he is definitely an expert. He's a professional in many ways, and he's he probably wasn't in on it, which is great. He's not an American Fed, so we can more or less trust what Edward Snowden's going to be saying. So go back to comments. So let's go back to comments. Jesse came in and Jesse said, "Where are you from?" I'm from Canada. Hello, Jesse. Welcome to the live stream. I'm from Canada. Jesse also asked, I'm commenting, I'm commenting from Australia. Oh, hello, Australia. Welcome. Welcome to the live stream. Um, so the good question for Australians. What do you guys think about this whole what happened in America. What's actually everything? Let's ask. We should ask Australia about everything. I mean, COVID and the Charlie Kirk assassination and all these major events. And I kind of feel like everything is part of a bigger picture. I don't think these are isolated incidents. I really do believe that this whole all of these events are more or less, not maybe not all of them, but most of these events are part of a bigger picture, are part of a deep state agenda. Okay. So I think that especially if when you do the test, you follow the money, you analyze the evidence, you suddenly see a bigger picture, you see connections, you see a deep state agenda, if you will, right? And actually, interesting enough, I just remembered when I was watching Quantico. So Quantico is an American FBI series. There's been several pretty good ones. Quantico wasn't bad. It starred Priyanka Chopra. Quantico, Quantico starring Priyanka Chopra, FBI. And in the FBI training, the Federal Bureau of Investigation training, when they're giving their agents training, they do like an assignment where suddenly they realize that everyone in the room, they all had pieces. They weren't all isolated incidents. Suddenly all the FBI agents in the room, the ones who were training to be FBI agents, because Quantico is where they train FBI agents. It's where they train people to become FBI agents, right? So when they were all in the room, the FBI agents, right? Priyanka Chopra, the actress, right? Playing an FBI agent trainee, they suddenly all realized that all of the assignments they were given were all connected. It was all part of like a big agenda. It was, they weren't isolated incidents, right? And so then the FBI director, the teacher, the professor, she comes out and she says, you know, a lot of times, a lot of these cases are connected, right? They're not isolated incidents. So I do think that it's very possible that there's a deep state agenda. They're following maybe a plan. You know, so I think it's important for Candace Owens and the investigators to keep an open mind about everything, and everything that they're telling the American feds are saying. I mean, when the FBI director Kash Patel, when even he, and I don't really trust him. I don't trust him anyways. I don't trust that guy as I don't trust him anyways. But when Kash Patel, the FBI director, he himself is saying that it's not making sense. The story's not making sense. Then like something else is going on here. The deep state. It's either the deep state, the American Fed, someone. There's a bigger picture going on with this whole everything. So go back to comments. Jesse said, we're concerned that you guys are going to take this too far internally and possibly have another civil war. It's possible. I mean, America had a civil war in the past, right? There's been a lot of racial tension. Another big concern of racial tension. So about 10, 12 years ago, it's on Fox News. Megyn Kelly was famous. This is how I'm from Canada. This is how I actually became aware of Megyn Kelly. And actually, I like Megyn Kelly. She's just funny. I just think Megyn Kelly's hilarious. So about 12 years ago, Megyn Kelly, was kind of like trolling people, Megyn Kelly, right on Fox News. Megyn Kelly made a statement like she's telling people, "Hey everyone, Santa's white. Santa's a white man. Santa's a white man." Like and 13 years ago, Fox News was the shit. Like Fox News, like they were, if you wanted to laugh, like if you wanted to just start laughing, because the regular news was boring or very divisive. But if you just wanted to start laughing, watch Fox News. Like Fox News was a joke. Like everything. So, like you would watch CNN and CNN would be like, tonight on CNN, we're going to be discussing environmental sustainability in the northern part of Ossetia of Georgia, right? And then you turn on Fox News and Fox News would be like, tonight we're discussing black people. Like, that's like the difference between Fox News and like all of the other stations. So anyways, Fox News, I'm not a racist, but anyways, I'm telling you what Megyn Kelly said. This is literally what Megyn Kelly said. Was a news anchor on Fox News. Megyn Kelly decided that it was a mission of hers. Megyn Kelly decided it was very important to announce to the world that Santa Claus is white. And you could literally pull up the clip. Like if you just Google search, she's famous for this. This is what actually one of the reasons why Megyn Kelly's famous. Obviously, Megyn Kelly's famous for many other things, but the how I became aware of Megyn Kelly was through the scandal, the Santa Claus is white scandal. That's how I came to be aware of Megyn Kelly. So a lot of people discovered Megyn Kelly from this. So Megyn Kelly, who's from Fox News, she decided on Fox News to make the assertion, the statement that Santa is white, people. Santa is a white man. And then suddenly it became like all these other news anchors started laughing at Megyn Kelly. There was Turk, is his name Sank from the Young Turks? You know that whole, Anna Kasparian and Sank Ugur. Is his name? I don't know how to say his name. I don't know how to say, is his name Sank or whatever? I know Anna Kasparian anyways. So those guys, they were making fun of Megyn Kelly a bit. MSNBC, all of these big news stations, they were kind of poking fun at Megyn Kelly because, she's special. Megyn Kelly's special. So Megyn Kelly decided to say that Santa is white. And she recently said it again. I remember watching just a few days ago the Megyn Kelly show on YouTube, and she once again brought up her famous scandal where she said Santa is white. So now, unfortunately, there's a lot of people, and I did see this argument a few years ago, actually, but it's now being rehashed again. Um, the malls, the malls in America, the American malls, are having trouble deciding if they're going to have a black Santa or a white Santa, especially when they have cities that are mixed, black and white. Is the mall going to have a black Santa or a white Santa, right? And you have one side of the people yelling on social media, oh, why after slavery and all this stuff, why can't you at least have a black Santa? Like, and then you have all of the traditional people saying, oh, Santa's white. Like you have Megyn Kelly asserting Santa's white, Santa's white. So this is now it's starting to we're seeing it on social media. It's starting to become a very big racial topic, a racial uh, politically charged conversation about whether or not Santa should is white and whether or not malls should be forced to have like a DEI Santa. Basically, like, yeah, a DEI Santa. Wait a minute. Okay, let's go back to the fact that Santa Claus is not real. Santa Claus is a fictional character. You know what I mean? DEI Santa. Anyways, it's a job, right? They're gonna hire a guy to play Santa at the mall, and but I mean, how would it be DEI? I mean, anyone could play Santa. I mean, okay. Anyways, maybe DEI. I don't know how to describe. This is a weird conversation. This is a weird. Like I didn't bring up. I didn't say, "Oh, Santa's white." That's Megyn Kelly said that. I'm just repeating what she said, and like I don't even know how to settle this debate. How do you go to a mall and the mall manager can't decide if they're going to make Santa white or black? Would you say, okay, just have two Santas, just have a black Santa on whatever, have a white Santa, but then that would confuse everyone, right? Especially when they're changing the Santa Clauses, right? That would confuse everyone if you have a black Santa and a white Santa working at the same mall, right? So if they say just have a white Santa, that'll piss off the other side, and if they say have a black Santa, that will piss off the other side. So let maybe we should go back to Megyn Kelly on this one. Hey, Megyn Kelly, you remember when you said Santa was white? Well, the American malls, the malls of America, they're having trouble deciding if they're going to have a white Santa or a black Santa now. So can you help us figure out how to solve this problem, Megyn Kelly? Since you so graciously 12 about approximately was it 12 years ago? It was about 10, 7, 12, whatever, 10 years ago. You asserted that Santa's white. And so now it pissed off all this whole other side of people that be like, "Oh, how dare you say that?" Right? So, hey, Megyn Kelly, can you help the malls in America decide because they're almost about to have a civil war over this. They can't decide if Santa's going to be white or black in the malls. So and America, you don't want to see America have a civil war, especially Canada. Like we have to live next door to America, right? Canada, we're connected to the United States. So Canada, if there's a civil war in America, like that's not good for Canada. Like it would not be good for maybe it would be good for Russia. I don't know. No, it wouldn't be. No, it wouldn't be good for anyone. Okay, if America had another civil war, it wouldn't be good for Canada. It wouldn't be good for Russia. It wouldn't be good for Australia. It wouldn't be good for Iran. It wouldn't be good for Germany. It wouldn't be good for Japan. It wouldn't be good for France. It wouldn't be good for Cuba. Anyways, so yeah, America having a civil war would not be good for anybody, especially Canada, since we're connected to America. And right now, over the Charlie Kirk assassination, Megyn Kelly once again asserting that Santa's white. Other reasons, the whole DEI hire stuff, where they're complaining about DEI hires. All of these things are building up so much racial tension. There's probably just as much racial tension in America right now as there was in the 1960s. So you are right, Mr. Guy from Australia. Welcome again. Thank you, Jesse, for leave your comment. Thank you for your comment, Jesse. You are definitely right to be concerned that America could be on the verge of having another civil war over very weird issues, like whether or not Santa Claus is white or not. Yeah. So maybe we'll see headlines, news headlines in the future. Civil war breaks out over disagreement over whether or not Santa Claus is white. Who knows? I've been shocked before, okay? I've been shocked after 9/11. America has shocked, I've been shocked before, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see news headlines in the future saying civil war breaks out in America because they can't decide whether or not Santa is white or not. But Megyn Kelly, she confirms and asserts that Santa is white. And half the people stand by Megyn Kelly. Anyways, um, go back to comments. Al Bundy came in and Al Bundy said, "What? You're not real." Listen, okay, I just and then someone else actually said Santa's a fictional character, right? So I just basically saying it's kind of silly to argue and go to have a civil war over a fictional character. It's kind of silly when you think about it, but like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if civil war broke out in the United States over that. So question for anyone who's in here right now. Do you think since Joe Biden pardoned his son Hunter Biden, right, over the cocaine scandal, since who else did they pardon? They issued a lot of pardons, didn't they? I know I remember a few months ago, or was it about a year ago, or a few months ago, didn't the White House issue a bunch of some president, was it Joe Biden? Yeah, it was Joe Biden, right? He issued pardons, right, for people. So, question for people. I don't even think Edward Snowden, he might not even want to go back to the United States, even if he was given a pardon, right? But do you think that maybe the United States should consider giving Edward Snowden a pardon? That's not to say that even if Edward Snowden was granted a pardon, that Edward Snowden would want to return back to the United States anyways. But my question to the people in the audience, the commenters, the people in the comment section, my question to the people in the comment section is: do you think Edward Snowden should be offered a pardon? In fact, maybe Trump. Do you think Donald Trump, since they've given other people pardons, do you think that Donald Trump and the Trump administration, do you think that they should issue a pardon and give a pardon to Edward Snowden? What do people think about that?